PodCastle, episode 878 for Tuesday the 11th of February 2025. The Carving of War by Somto Hezaway, read by Muffin Follower and produced by Devin Martin. Rated R, with content notes for violent murder and the death of an animal. Good morning, good day, good afternoon and good evening, and welcome to PodCastle, the flying castle of fantasy fiction. I'm your host, Matt Dovey, and it is my privilege to present for your enjoyment The Carving of War by Somto Hezaway, narrated by Muffin Follower. This story was first published in Tor's Africa Risen Anthology 2022. Before we get into it, I need to get something off my chest. Because we got updated download numbers for last year in our internal Slack recently, and I hate to say this to you, but lasers and tentacles reach about double what we are, and that just won't stand, because I know that fantasy is the best spec genre, right? The father and mother to them all, the genre of Shakespeare and Beowulf and Homer and Gilgamesh, the original and the greatest. We've got to pump those numbers up, right? These are rookie numbers. So, the dragon asks a favour. Tell your friends. Share your favourite stories on whatever social media platform most poisons your day. Share this one, share anyone. Just tell people we're here, tell them that we're doing one story told well each week, and there's over 800 to dive back into, and who knows how many more to come, week after week after week. For today's story, your author is Somto Hezaway, a Nigerian Igbo writer, editor and filmmaker. He is a creative writing MFA student at the University of Maryland and an alumnus of Clarion West, Tin House, Voodoo Nought and Milford SF workshops. His work has been shortlisted for the British Fantasy Award, Sidney J. Bounds Awards, the Nomo Awards, the Afritondo Short Story Prize, the Utopia Awards, and has been nominated for the Pushcart Prize and the British Science Fiction Award. His works have appeared and are forthcoming in the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, Uncanny, Strange Horizons, Nightmare, Beneath Ceaseless Skies, Fireside Magazine, Escape Pod, Pseudopod, Poetry Magazine, Flash Fiction Online, Flame Tree Press, and others. He is an assistant editor of the Publishing Taught Me anthology from SIFWA and the National Endowment for the Arts, and co-editor of the Will This Be a Problem anthology. Your narrator, Muffin Follower is a Nigerian writer living between Lagos and Iowa City. Her work has appeared in Guernica, Variant Lit, Pleiades, Ploughshares and elsewhere. She is a final year candidate of the non-fiction MFA at Iowa. She is currently at work on her debut memoir Interrogating the Body and its relationship with desire. And now pay attention, for our tale is about to begin, and you will not disappoint it again.
The Carving of War by Somto Hezaway, narrated by Muffin Follower. Audley was a child when Nkaela, her grandmother, died. All she remembered of her were her braids, a tangle of clouds that reached for the floor. She remembered her eyes, how they swallowed her face. To look into them was to be lost in a vastness. It was to find eyes, owl eyes, bold eyes, brown eyes, staring back at you. Most of all, she remembered her kindness, an unending sea. Nkaela had been Dibia, keeper to Idemmili, the roaring python, they who drowned oceans, mother of mothers. At the birth of time, Idemmili, like beads dancing on a fragile waist, had wound herself around the clans of Obosi. Out of her mouth the Eke River poured, its brooks and streamlets giving sustenance to the corn in the farmlands, the antelopes of the wild, and the irokos that split the sky. Odili's family was bound in perpetuity to Idemmili. With her grandmother's passing, the fanged staff fell to her mother, Adaugu. In the past, a few keepers had met their fate with defiance. Odili's great-grandfather, Agbadike, had refused the staff when it passed to him. Setting the shrine of Idemmili ablaze, he invoked the ritual of blood in a bid to sever the bond that tethered his life to the deity. 3 days later, a breadfruit fell from a tree and split his skull in half. Like moth to fire, Adaugo embraced the mantle of keeper. Before her 12th birthday, she could already perform the passage rites of ancestors. Beneath the glow of a horned moon, she'd slay a ram, its body thrashing beneath her knee. Immersed in its blood, she'd wade into the Eke, bridging the fold between the living and the dead. Ancestors past would come walking through her, blessing and cursing the ones they left behind. When she was heavy with Odili, Adaugo ventured into Ndemili's mouth and emerged unscathed, spirit water coursing through her veins. One of the dwindling flew. Adaugo knew the words to the eternal utterances and the anchors that held them. The clans of Obosi had revered in Kerala. Adaugo they feared. She was power unbridled, her dedication to Idemili undying. Like her mother and keepers before her, Adaugo stayed unwed. We are the rage of Idemili, unburdened by the constraints of love and companionship, she'd remind Odili. We are fire and water. We are rain and lighting. Our bodies are nothing but vessels. Still, keepers were mandated to bear offspring and preserve their line. Without a present father, a mother who in all entirety was of another realm, Odili roamed the village unchecked, her python familiar slithering behind her. More than a companion, it had become a parent, regurgitating rabbits and bush rats for her to roast and eat. When the first missionaries came to the village, Odili was drawn in by their flaky bread and the trinkets that hung from their neck, how they shimmered in the light. At the rooster's crow, she'd run into the village, into the shack that doubled as a chapel, to watch the priests bless communion, to watch Edward. Edward was a mass server, and Edward was beautiful. With her eyes, she followed him, and when he caught her stare, she'd hold it till he flushed red and looked away. He intrigued her, the sapphire of his eyes, his hair, the burning of dawn, the way he said her name, like a song lived in the walls of his lips. When he first kissed her, a gentle kiss, his nose brushing against hers, he had closed his eyes. Odili kept hers ajar. When the priest baptized her in the Eke, Odili didn't feel new, born again, like Edward had said she would. And when she received communion, the blood of Christ sweet on her tongue, only then did her mother come raging like a flood, her screams claps of thunder. I curse you all! Her outstretched finger trembled under her voice. You touched a seed of Idemili. You defiled her waters. She paced around them, leopard to prey. Come and see how you fall. That night, the chapel burned to the ground and Edward with it. When the last of the missionaries left Obosi, they took Odili with them. She was 16. Her mother, far off in the spirit wilds, had not been there to stop them. Odili cupped the scream falling from her lips. It had been 20 years since she last saw it. There it was in her bedroom, coiled under her child's head. Walking, then running, then stumbling, she made for the kitchen. From behind the pot cabinet, she drew a cutlass, the one for splitting the coconuts. Darting back to the room, her breath still in her chest, she inched towards her child's cot. She reached into it, her fingers clattering against each other, and picked him up in one swoop. Setting him in his chair far at the end of the room, she took the cutlass and hacked everything to pieces. The cot, the mattress, her arusi, familiar, bright gold pyramids trailing down its body. She hacked it all, wood, foam, and skin scattering across the room. She did not stop until her child began to cry. The rest of the night met Odili awake. She kept turning in bed every time the crickets buried in the walls broke into their high-chirped songs. Checking on him for the 4th time, she found her child silent with open eyes. In his little face, Odili saw her grandmother. She lifted him, pressing his temple to her lips and pulling away when she felt warm liquid seeping into her clothes. Naughty, naughty boy, she sighed. She nuzzled her nose on his and he smiled, his incisors specks of white. Changing his urine-stained clothes and putting him back to sleep, she headed for the bathroom and met her mother at the door. "Gods!" Audley cowered to the floor. "Foolish child, what have you done?" Her mother's voice was a battle waiting to begin. Mama. Audley had not set eyes on her mother, not in years. With the markings of the old faith etched on her face, cowries from the Eke River clasped around her neck, her hair silvered milk, her mother was starting to look very much like her grandmother. "You took all I sowed in you and you left it to the crows." On the floor, hands wrapped around her body, Audley sat noiseless. With her mother came the memories, the ones she locked behind walls. Now the walls came tumbling down, and the memories poured in, drowning her. "Where is its body?" her mother asked, anger sewn into the wrinkles on her face. Like a baby learning to walk, Audley drew herself off the floor, out the back door and into the bushes behind her house. Her mother followed, like a shadow on an ill-lit street. Coming to a spot, Audley stepped aside, and like an arrow, her mother's cry pierced the night. Audley had never heard anything like it. It was anguish giving voice. "Mother of my mothers, gouge out my eyes, for I have seen the unseen," she cried, collapsing to the ground next to the lynched corpse of the familiar. Ash and dust was all that remained of it. "Insolent child!" She threw a glare at Audley, and in her eyes something built. "You will be the death of us." Audley just stood there as her mother resumed her wailing. She had never seen her cry, not once, not even when her grandmother had died. "How did you find me?" "You have always been a slow one." Her mother dried her eyes, turning to her. "Did you think you could just leave?" She continued, mockery stealing into her voice. "The path before you is set in stone." "I didn't leave. I was taken. I thought you'd come for me." "The way back was ahead of you. You just chose not to see it." "I was a child. I was lost. I waited for you." Audley caught the tear making its way down her face. "You abandoned me. And when you became a woman, what held you from returning to your duty, to your mother? Mother, you are dead to me." Her mother's slap fell like a gush of cold breeze on her cheek. It would have stung more if she had been there in flesh, not projecting her spirit. "I want you to leave," Audley said unfazed. "You must come back to Obosi. You must atone for this atrocity. I'd rather die 1,000 deaths." "Oh, you think you have known suffering?" Her mother's eyes narrowed. "Something is coming. Something unlike anything you've ever seen. Leave, please." In a blink, her mother vanished into the night. Audley held a heart in her hands, red ants crawling over it. She ate it whole. Out of the hollow in her chest, she took out a rock. She watched as cracks tore across its rough exterior like they did on her bedroom walls. Breaking open, a python, fanged and rattled, lunged at her. Audley willed herself awake. She had not slept in days, not since her mother's visit. Even in the heat of daylight, she kept seeing things. The bread hawker with 2 heads, 3 men with bellies like drums swinging from a guava branch, her reflection missing in the mirror. With her sheets, she dabbed the sweat the nightmare had brought with it, looked over into her child's new cot, and he wasn't there. Audley panicked. Tearing through the baby blankets, she spun around, dread crawling onto her face, thinking perhaps she had left him in the living room, though she vividly remembered tucking him in. She made for the door. Hand on the knob, she stopped. She turned towards a closed-off corner of the room and found her child cradled in the hands of a darkness. "He has our eyes," it said, the echo of its voice the crackling of fire. "Give him to me." The dread on Audley's face disappeared and fury took its place. "Give him to me." The walls shook as black veins zipped across her skin, her pupils eclipsing the white of her eyes. The darkness faded, melting into the crevices on the floor, leaving the child behind. "They came for our boy. They came for him," Odili said, ushering Nialeugo into her house. After the episode with the darkness, Odili had sent for him. They had met years ago when he ran with the ghost masquerades of Okija. When she had told him she was carrying their child and he asked her to marry him, she refused. Nialeugo was a river, forever on the run. He was everywhere and nowhere, and Odili had no interest in being a part of that. There was also the reminder at the back of her mind that she was promised to another, one clearly as testing as they were vicious. However, she and Nialeugo remained friends as well as parents to their child, with him swooping in from time to time, bringing wood carvings and sweets that tasted of ginger. "Whatever it was, we must trap it and banish it," he said, scanning the house, hands akimbo. "Banish it?" "Yes, banish his connection to you." Odili nodded. This was why she'd sent for him. She may have forsaken her belief in the old faith. Nialeugo had not. A boy, he had been an apprentice to a local blacksmith in a land whose name was not to be spoken. When stone morphed to gold in his hand, he spoke not a word of it, and when the flames from his hearth spoke to him, he spoke back. "Bring my boy, let me hold him." Nialeugo laughed his coarse laugh as he returned to his jaunty self. Come nightfall, he took strands of hair from Odili's head, bound it to a half moon, and when the night started to speak, he summoned the darkness. "Bia, come, Bia Rusala Okogu, come wrestle fire," he chanted, dancing around the runes he had drawn on Odili's bedroom floor. Odili sat in the corner, their baby resting on her shoulder. "Bia, Kene, Bia Furogu." Nialeugo's voice pulsated. "Ifu, Igba, Ifu, Igba." He stopped in his tracks, his eyes darting around in their sockets. "It is here." "Where?" Odili sprang up. Nialeugo did not respond. "Nialeugo." Odili put the child down among his carvings. "Nah." He charged at her in scattered steps and pinned her to the wall. Drawing his dagger, he brought it to her throat. Odili, still reeling from the suddenness of it all, raised her face to his. In his face, she did not find him. It is something is inside me," he strained, blood streaming down his ears. "Baoso, run!" Crawling from under him, the blade still grazing her skin, Odili picked up their child, but she did not run. She turned to Nialeugo and she saw it, shadowed claws gripping his neck from behind. From over his shoulder, an eye peeped at her, then a second, then 100, all shrouded in darkness. "Let him go!" Like a puppet, they strung Nialeugo forward up to her. He let out a cry as the claws dug deeper into him. "Please," she cried, falling to her knees. One by one, they took their claws out of him as Nialeugo exhaled. And in all their voices, "Come, drink with us," they said. Their claws to the front of his neck, they slashed his throat open and like a black hole, vanished into themselves. Nialeugo's hands went to his neck as he reached for his voice and crashed to the ground. Odili ran to him, tying her baby to her back. Unsure, tears clouding her sight, she pressed her hands against the gash, blood spluttering all over. "Help! Somebody help!" She stood in an attempt to find help, and Nialeugo held her, his touch weak, cold. He did not say a word. He didn't need to. Odili sat with him, in his blood, in the pieces of her heart. She stayed till the light left his eyes. Odili threw her things into a box, touched her house with Nialeugo's body in it, and she ran. Journeying for days, her child on her back, she made it to the bank of the Eke River. Regardless of the serpent horde weaving through its waters, the river was the fastest route to Obosi. Making the crossing on a crowded ferry and hoping no one would recognize her, she got to her mother's hut. It was how she remembered it, a roof built out of palm fronds, an unkept hibiscus hedge, and the constant bleating of goats. Her mother was bent over a mortar, pounding cocoyams when Odili walked in. "I knew you'd come," she said. She didn't even look up at Odili. "Ngwanu, let us begin, for the night gathers." In the passing months, they performed the cleansing ritual of rebirth. Every third market day, Adaogo washed Odili in the Eke. Her body breaking the waters, it reminded her of her baptism, of Edward. "Mere mortals would be whipped through the village for this sacrilege, but you are my child, the blood in your veins, spirit water. Your shame is mine alone to bear." The nights when Adaogo flung open the ancestral gates, she'd balance a calabash of python eggs on Odili's head and have her walk naked into the wilds. Odili just prayed she didn't run into a night wolf. Before the ones who came before us, be bare. In between bathing in the Eke and running from wolves, Odili's days became cold and terrifying. One day, her mother, nowhere in sight, she sat in the yard in the gentle breeze and watched her child build mud dunes. "What is his name?" Adaogo sprang from behind her. "Nkaela," Odili said, recovering from the fright. "I named him after Grandmama." She added it as it dawned on her that her mother had never asked for her son's name. Adaogo sat in the sand next to her. She had not heard her mother's name in a while. "Like its bearers, it is beautiful," she said, her gaze on the boy. "He has her eyes. He has yours too." They were looking at each other now. For the first time in a long time, Odili saw her mother. She placed her hand in hers and Adaogo squeezed it, a knowing squeeze. Hand in hand, they sat in silence. For the final rites, the ashes of her familiar, Odili had brought it along in an old Milo tin, was scattered into the Eke, a wake held in its honor. "Weep, child, for we lay our mothers to rest." And weep Odili did. At the end of the rituals, a grave illness overtook her. On her mother's mat, sweat soaking into her clothes, her breathing rasped, her body felt paper thin. Wiping her with a cold towel, Adaogo chanted incantations under her breath, her head bobbing back and forth. What is happening to me?" Odili's speech was starting to leave her. "Did we do it wrong?" "Be calm. The ritual is taking its toll," Adaogo hushed her. "Atonement is a long, hard road, and you have much to atone for," she continued. "Abandoning your sacred duty, murdering your familiar, then there's that peasant trickster you spawned a child with. Good thing I rid you of him." You rid me? Of him?" "Quiet now, you need to rest." Sitting up, Odili pushed her mother's hands away. She saw clearly now, for in Adaogo's caged eyes, a darkness lingered. The darkness that had come for her child. The darkness that murdered Nnaye Olugo. "Gods! It was you!" All the color drained from Odili's face. Adaogo straightened up from the mat, her face vacant, unapologetic. "Why, Mama?" "Idemili is merciful. It is my duty to be her vengeance." Drawing strength from nowhere, Odili leaped at her. From the soil, Adaogo summoned taut roots that grasped Odili, binding her feet and wrists. Like threads, Odili tore through them and descended on her mother. "Die!" she screamed, her hands wrapped around Adaogo's throat. Adaogo flailed and clawed, spitting into Odili's eyes, striking her with blindness. Odili wiped off the curse like it was water. "You are old, and like you, your power wanes." Odili tightened her grip. "No one will mourn you." As Adaogo gasped for her last breath, Odili shrieked, letting go of her. Something was wrong. She could feel her muscles tearing off her bones, the bones breaking, crushing into each other, pain tearing through her. "What have you done to me?" She glowered at her mother, her eyes cut diamonds. "To right this wrong, there must be a reckoning." Adalgo coughed, coming to her knees. A strand of Idemili was torn, and it must be replaced. What? Doing this to you? It wounds me, but I am without a choice. No! Odili's legs had started to morph into one. Mama, stop this, please. Don't worry, I will raise my grandchild to be stronger. Odili, inside of herself, her heart racing faster than a hummingbird's wings, watched her body come undone. As the transformation edged towards her chest, Odili reached, grabbing her mother by the leg. This is not the last of me, mother, she hissed, her tongue forked in two. Brace yourself, for I will be war, and I will come. Letting go of herself, of the fight in her, Odili fledged into a python, the brown bark, and into dusk she slithered.
And welcome back. That was The Carving of War by Somto Hezaway. And if you enjoyed that, then check out his other story in our archives, episode 776, A Girl is Blood, Spirit and Fire, from 2 years ago. Though the content note on that one is for FGM, and it's not a passing reference either, so be sure you're in the right frame of mind. When you are though, it's brilliant. He's also popped up all over Escape Artists and has stories in Escape Pod, episode 876, like Stars Daring to Shine, and Pseudopod, episode 952, Onitshimain, Ochinjawa, The Twins and Kapoor and the Shadows of Shoprite, as well as the other stories round and about the place, links from his website, somtoahezaway.com. Somto centres these notes on The Carving of War. This story draws inspiration and material from the mystery of the Eki Idimili deity, a giant peaceful python revered in certain Igbo communities. The murder of this python is considered a great taboo. Thank you, Somto, for the background and the story. What a terrible price we can pay for not conforming to our parents' needs and expectations, huh? I have long since grown accustomed to the disappointment that I am not already a chief technology officer somewhere, or cabinet minister, or whatever. I'd like to say I had become immune to it, but the truth is I've only become inured to it. That buzzing sensation every time I'm with them, that silent sigh that sits over us like a blanket of fog. And all I did was decide that actually, I don't want to spend the best decades of my life existing as a vibrating ball of stress, to try and retire rich when I'm older and already broken and beyond joy. I'd rather just enjoy my life as I'm living it at a somewhat steadier pace. So imagine what it's like for trans folk, where parents can react so badly to their child deciding for themselves who they are, that they might end up on a stage at a presidential inauguration throwing Nazi salutes. It's surprising how difficult this fact is for so many, but you do not have the right to control anyone. Not your employees and direct reports at work, not your significant others, not even your children. You have to let people be who they want to be, and that might not be what you expected or planned on. Gods know I've gone through that readjustment enough myself, from 10 years ago assuming my kids would just be going to school and swimming lessons and friends' houses like every other kid, to the actual path we've ended up on with a house that's got more autism in it than it has bottles of milk. Because if you try and fight it, well, you're going to lose them as a person anyway. People are who they are, and they can no more change that than they can change which direction their knees bend. Which is to say it hurts an awful lot and leaves them unable to leave the house if they try. Anyway, I don't expect any of you need telling any of the above, but what you might need to hear is that if someone is trying to tell you that they know who you are better than you yourself do, you do not need to listen to them. Trust yourself. And don't waste this limited span of life trying to make it fit someone else's vision. It's not worth it. And if they're insisting on it, they only love the idea of you, not the real you. You should love yourself more than that. That was our show for this week. On behalf of everyone at PodCastle, your co-editors Shingai Enjoro Kagunda and Eleanor R. Wood, assistant editor Caitlin Tavanovich, audio engineers Devin Martin and Eric Valdez, and our many wonderful first readers, Andrew Cahoe, Craig Jackson, Amalia Harrington, Julia Patt, Kieran Corsaini, Ryan Cole, Sarah S. Messenger, Shrikripa Krishna Prasad, Tava Nova, Tierney Bailey, Zeev Witties, and myself, Matt Dovey. Thank you for letting us share another story with you. The legal bit. PodCastle is part of the Escape Artists Foundation, a 501c3 non-profit, and this episode is distributed under the Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 international license. That means you can share it, and please do, but you cannot sell it and you cannot change it. If you want specifics, check creativecommons.org. Our music is by Shiva in Exile. Everything we do on PodCastle is 100% donor funded, and if you'd like to support what we and the rest of EA do, please join us on our Patreon at patreon.com/EApodcasts. Prefer another method? There's details for supporting us via Twitch, Amazon Prime, Ko-fi and PayPal on escapeartist.net. We'll be back next Tuesday with another fantastic tale. In the meantime, you might care to check out our sister podcasts, Escape Pod for science fiction, Pseudopod for horror, Cast of Wonders for YA speculative fiction, and Catscast for speculative cat stories. If your heart belongs to us though, we'll see you next week. Be safe and be kind.